So, today, I'm going to be talking about the entire history of computers, all of it. And trust me, there's a lot more to it than you'd expect. Like, this story doesn't start in some Silicon Valley garage, it starts thousands of years ago. So, yeah, get comfortable, maybe grab a blanket, and let's get into it. Okay, so before we get into actual machines and circuits and all that stuff, we need to go way, way back because humans were computing long before anyone built anything. Picture this. It's somewhere around 35,000 years ago. You're in what's now Swaziland in southern Africa, and someone picks up a baboon bone and starts carving little notches into it. 29 notches, neat and deliberate. This thing is called the Lubombo bone, and it's probably the oldest piece of computing we've ever found. Nobody knows for sure what they were counting. Could have been days, could have been tracking the moon. Some researchers think the 29 marks line up with a lunar cycle, maybe even a menstrual cycle. We don't really know, but the point is, someone looked at the world around them and thought, I need to keep track of this. I need to remember a number. And that right there is computing. Not a machine, not a screen. Just a person and a bone and the need to count something. There's another one from around the same time called the Ishango bone found in Central Africa. This one's even more interesting because it has multiple rows of notches arranged in patterns. Some people think it shows early multiplication or maybe even prime numbers. That's debated, but what's clear is that these weren't just random scratches. People were seeing patterns and numbers tens of thousands of years ago. For a long time after this, humans kept finding ways to count stuff. Knots in rope, pebbles in piles, marks carved into wood. And here's a fun one. The word calculate actually comes from the Latin word calculus, which means small stone or pebble, because Romans used to count with little stones. So every time you hear the word calculate, you're basically saying, do the pebble thing. That's kind of amazing when you think about it. Now fast forward a few thousand years, civilizations are forming, people are farming, trading, building cities, and suddenly you need math for everything. How much grain is in the storehouse? How do we divide this land? How many days until the next harvest? Counting on your fingers doesn't cut it anymore. You need tools. Enter the abacus. This shows up around 2500 BC, maybe earlier. The Babylonians had a version. The Chinese developed the swan pan. The Romans had their own. It's basically beads on rods, and each bead represents a number depending on its position. Simple, right? But this thing was the most powerful computing device on the planet for literally thousands of years. Thousands. People were doing addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, even square roots on an abacus. And by the way, people still use them today. There are competitions in Asia where kids on abacuses beat people using electronic calculators. That's not a joke. A wooden frame with beads on it competing with modern electronics and sometimes winning. But here's where it gets really wild. Around 100 BC, somebody in ancient Greece built something that shouldn't have existed for another 1,000 years. It's called the Antikythera mechanism, and the story of how we found it is almost as interesting as the thing itself. So, in 1901, a group of sponge divers are working off the coast of this tiny Greek island called Antikythera. They find a shipwreck, ancient Roman ship full of statues and pottery and all sorts of artifacts. And mixed in with everything is this corroded lump of bronze. Nobody thinks much of it at first. It sits in a museum for a while until someone notices there's a gear inside it. A gear? In something from 100 BC. Turns out this lump of corroded metal was a machine with over 30 interlocking bronze gears. And it could predict the positions of the sun and moon, track eclipses, even calculate when the Olympic Games would happen. It's about the size of a shoebox, hand-powered. You turn a crank and the gears move, and it tells you where celestial bodies will be on any given date. This is basically the world's first analog computer, built over 2,000 years ago, by people who didn't have electricity or factories or any modern tools. Some researchers think it might be connected to the school of Archimedes. We're not totally sure who built it or how, but here's the thing that really gets me. After this, Nothing even close to this level of complexity was built again for over 1,000 years. That knowledge just vanished. Imagine that. A civilization figured out how to build a mechanical computer, and then humanity just forgot how to do it. Now there's one more thing we need to talk about before we get into actual machines: the word computer itself. Because for most of history, computer wasn't a thing, it was a person. That was literally the job title. A computer was someone who computes, someone who sits at a desk and does calculations by hand all day long, and a lot of these human computers were women. During World War II, entire rooms of women worked as computers, doing the math for ballistics tables and code breaking and engineering calculations. So, for thousands and thousands of years, computing meant human brains doing repetitive, tedious work with maybe an abacus or a set of tables to help out. And eventually, somebody asked the obvious question: what if we could build a machine to do this instead? What if we could take this boring, repetitive work and hand it off to something mechanical, something that doesn't get tired, doesn't make mistakes, doesn't need a lunch break? That question changed everything. And the first people to seriously try answering it lived in an era of gears and clockwork and steam. All right, so now we're moving into the 1600s, and this is where people start seriously building machines that can calculate. And the story of how we got from simple counting tools to actual computing machines is full of geniuses and dreamers and people who were way ahead of their time. Let's start with a guy named John Napier. He was a Scottish mathematician, and in 1614 he published something called logarithms. Now I know that word probably gives you flashbacks to math class, but stick with me because this actually matters. What Napier figured out was a way to turn multiplication problems into addition problems. And that might sound boring, but if you're an astronomer in the 1600s trying to calculate planetary orbits, or a navigator trying to figure out where your ship is in the middle of the ocean, this was a game changer. Multiplication with huge numbers is slow and error-prone. Addition is way easier. Napier basically gave scientists a shortcut. He also invented this thing called Napier's bones in 1617, which was a set of wooden or ivory rods with numbers on them that you could arrange to do multiplication and division by hand. It was a physical calculating tool. Simple, but clever. And from Napier's logarithms came the slide rule. Two rulers that slide against each other with logarithmic scales printed on them. You line up the numbers and read off the answer. Engineers and scientists use slide rules for over 350 years. Every bridge built before the 1970s, every ship designed, every building calculated, every early airplane engineered, all done with a slide rule. This little stick of wood and metal was the engineer's best friend until electronic calculators killed it in the 1970s. Some engineers still have their old slide rules in a drawer somewhere. They couldn't bring themselves to throw them out. Now in 1642, something really important happens. A French kid named Blaise Pascal, who's only 19 years old, builds a mechanical calculator, and the reason he builds it is honestly kind of sweet. His father was a tax commissioner in France, and his job involved doing enormous amounts of arithmetic by hand, adding up taxes, calculating payments, checking figures, hours and hours of tedious addition every single day. Young Pascal watched his father struggling with all this and basically thought, I can fix this, I'll build a machine to do it. And he did. He called it the Pascaline. It was a brass box with a series of interlocking gears and numbered wheels. You'd turn the wheels to input numbers, and the gears would carry over digits automatically. Like when you add 9 plus 1 and the ones column resets to 0 and the tens column goes up by 1. The Pascaline did that mechanically. It could add and subtract. That's it. But that was enough. Now here's the thing about the Pascaline. It worked, but it wasn't exactly a hit. Pascal built about 50 of them over several years, and hardly anyone bought them. They were expensive. They broke down. And honestly, most people figured they could do arithmetic just as fast by hand. Sound familiar? New technology comes along, and people say, nah, I'll stick with what I know. This happens over and over in the history of computing. about 30 years later in 1673, a German mathematician named Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz improved on Pascal's design. And yeah, this is the same Leibniz who co-invented calculus along with Newton. The guy was ridiculously brilliant. His machine was called the stepped reckoner, and it could do all 4 basic operations: addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. He invented a special gear mechanism called the Leibniz wheel that made multiplication possible mechanically. But here's what's really interesting about Leibniz. He had a vision that went way beyond calculating. He dreamed of a machine that could do all logical reasoning, not just arithmetic, but actual thinking. He called this idea the calculus ratiocinator, a universal reasoning machine. He also worked on binary arithmetic, the idea that all numbers could be represented using just zeros and ones. He wasn't the first to think about binary. That concept goes back centuries, but Leibniz took it seriously as a mathematical system. He never got to build his reasoning machine. The technology of his time was nowhere near ready, but the ideas he was playing with, binary numbers and mechanical logic, those ideas would become the foundation of every computer ever built. He was dreaming about computers 300 years before they existed. He just didn't know that's what he was doing. Now let's jump forward to 1801, because something happens in the world of weaving that ends up being huge for computing. A French weaver named Joseph-Marie Jacquard invents a loom that uses punch cards. Each card has holes punched in specific positions. The loom reads the cards, and the pattern of holes controls which threads get lifted and which don't. Different cards make different patterns. You string the cards together in sequence, and the loom automatically weaves complex designs, flowers, portraits, whatever you want. This is a massive deal. And I know it sounds weird that a weaving machine matters for the history of computers, but think about what's actually happening here. A machine is reading instructions from an external source and following them automatically. The punch cards are a program. The loom is executing that program. Change the cards and you change what the machine does. That's programming. In 1801, on a loom. By the way, the silk workers in Lyon were not happy about this. They saw the Jacquard loom as a threat to their jobs. There were protests. Some looms were destroyed. People were genuinely scared that machines would replace them. And this was over 200 years ago. The fear of automation isn't new. It's been around since the very beginning of programmable machines. Okay, now we get to the big one. Charles Babbage. If there's one person you could point to and say that's the father of computing, it would probably be this guy. And his story is equal parts genius and frustration. Babbage was a British mathematician born in 1791. He was brilliant, obsessive, and by most accounts, incredibly difficult to work with. He hated street musicians, literally campaigned to ban organ grinders from London. He'd get into arguments with pretty much everyone. But the man could think about machines like nobody else. In 1822, Babbage started working on something called the difference engine. This was a mechanical calculator designed to compute mathematical tables automatically. See, at the time, all sorts of important tables, navigation tables, astronomical tables, logarithm tables, were calculated by hand by human computers, and they were full of errors. Ships were getting lost at sea because the navigation tables had mistakes in them. People were dying because of arithmetic errors. Babbage wanted to eliminate human error by having a machine do the calculations. He got funding from the British government and started building, and building, and building. The project dragged on for years. It went way over budget. Babbage kept redesigning things, arguing with his engineer, demanding perfection. The government eventually pulled the funding after spending about £17,000, which in today's money is somewhere around $2 to $3 million. The difference engine was never finished in his lifetime, but here's where Babbage did something that was either brilliant or insane, depending on how you look at it. While he was still failing to finish the difference engine, he started designing something even more ambitious, the analytical engine, and this thing was on a completely different level. The analytical engine had a mill, which was basically a central processing unit. It had a store, which was memory. It took input through punch cards borrowed directly from the Jacquard loom. It could output results through a printer. It could branch, meaning it could make decisions based on results. It could loop, meaning it could repeat operations. This was a general-purpose programmable computer designed in the 1830s. Let me say that again, the 1830s. Babbage drew up thousands of detailed engineering plans for this machine. It would have been powered by a steam engine and been about the size of a small locomotive. He never built it. The technology of Victorian England just wasn't precise enough to manufacture the parts he needed, but his designs were sound. In 1991, the London Science Museum built a working difference engine number 2 from Babbage's original plans. It works perfectly. The man's engineering was right. He was just born 100 years too early. Now we need to talk about Ada Lovelace because her story is incredible. Ada was born in 1815. Her father was Lord Byron, the famous poet. Her mother was terrified that Ada would inherit her father's wild temperament, so she had Ada educated heavily in mathematics and science, the idea being that logic and reason would keep the Byron madness at bay. Whatever the reasoning, it worked out pretty well for the history of computing. Ada met Charles Babbage at a party in 1833 when she was just 17. She became fascinated by his difference engine and later by the analytical engine. In 1843, she published a set of notes on the analytical engine that went way beyond just describing the machine. She wrote what is now recognized as the first computer program, an algorithm for computing Bernoulli numbers on the analytical engine, a program for a computer that hadn't been built yet. But what really set Ada apart wasn't the algorithm, it was her vision. She saw something that even Babbage didn't fully grasp. Babbage thought of his engine as a very advanced calculator, a machine for numbers. Ada realized it could be so much more. She wrote that the engine could manipulate any symbols, not just numbers. It could potentially compose music, create graphics, process language. She saw that computing wasn't about arithmetic. It was about processing information, any information. She was right. That insight is basically the foundation of modern computer science. And she had it in 1843. She died just 9 years later at the age of 36. The programming language Ada created by the US Department of Defense in the 1980s was named after her. And here's what gets me about this whole era. You've got Babbage designing a real computer in the 1830s. You've got Ada writing programs for it. You've got all the concepts, the processor, the memory, the programming, the input and output. Everything was there. The only thing missing was the technology to actually build it. It would take another 100 years and a world war before those ideas finally became real machines. So up until now, everything we've talked about has been mechanical. Gears and wheels and rods and punch cards, all powered by hand or steam. But in the second half of the 1800s, electricity starts showing up, and that changes everything. Because electricity is fast, way faster than any gear can turn. And when people figured out how to combine electricity with logic, the modern computer became inevitable. It was just a matter of time. Let's start with a problem. In 1880, the United States conducted its census, counting every person in the country. And it took 7 years to process all the data. 7 years. By the time they finished tabulating the results, the information was almost useless because the population had already changed significantly, and the country was growing fast. They knew the 1890 census would be even bigger. At this rate, the 1890 census might not be finished before the 1900 census started. That's obviously a problem. Enter Herman Hollerith. He was a statistician and engineer who had worked on the 1880 census and saw firsthand how painfully slow the whole process was. So he built a machine, an electromechanical tabulating machine that used punch cards to store data. Each person's information, age, gender, occupation, birthplace, was encoded as holes punched in specific positions on a card. The machine would read the cards by pressing them against a grid of tiny pins. Where there was a hole, the pin would push through and make contact with a pool of mercury underneath, completing an electrical circuit. that circuit would advance a counter by 1. Simple, but brilliant. The 1890 census used Hollerith's machines, and the results were processed in about 1 year, down from 7. The population count itself was done in just 6 months. The government saved roughly $5 million, which was an enormous amount of money back then. Now here's the part that most people don't know. Hollerith started a company to sell his tabulating machines. That company went through a couple of mergers and name changes, and in 1924, it became International Business Machines Corporation, IBM. Yeah, one of the most important technology companies in history exists because the American government couldn't count people fast enough. Sometimes the biggest innovations come from the most boring problems. Hollerith's machines were electromechanical. They used electricity to read data and advance counters, but the actual processing was still pretty basic. To get to real computing, to machines that could actually think in some meaningful way, we needed something else. We needed someone to figure out the math of thinking itself. That someone was George Boole, and he actually did his work decades before Hollerith back in 1854. Boole was a self-taught English mathematician. Never went to university as a student, taught himself mathematics from books, and eventually became a professor anyway. In 1854, he published a book called An Investigation of the Laws of Thought, and in it, he did something remarkable. He showed that logical reasoning, the kind of thinking you do when you say if this is true and that is true, then this other thing must also be true, could be expressed as mathematics. He created an algebra of logic. True and false became values you could calculate with. He defined operations like AND, OR, and NOT. If A is true and B is true, then A and B is true. If A is true or B is true, then A or B is true. Not true is false. Not false is true. Simple rules, but incredibly powerful when you combine them. At the time, almost nobody cared. It was pure philosophy as far as most people were concerned. Interesting, but useless. Boolean algebra sat there in textbooks for about 80 years before anyone figured out what to do with it. The person who figured it out was Claude Shannon, and what he did might be the most underrated breakthrough in the entire history of computing. In 1937, Shannon was a 21-year-old graduate student at MIT. For his master's thesis, he wrote a paper showing that Boolean algebra could be implemented using electrical switches. Think about that. Every logical operation Boole had defined, and, or, not, all of it, could be built as a physical circuit using switches that were either on or off. On equals true equals 1. Off equals false equals 0. An AND gate is a circuit where the output is on only if both inputs are on. An OR gate is a circuit where the output is on if either input is on. A NOT gate flips the signal. On becomes off becomes on. Shannon proved that you could build any logical operation using combinations of these simple gates, which means you could build circuits that make decisions, circuits that calculate, circuits that in a very real sense think. His master's thesis has been called the most important master's thesis of the 20th century, and honestly, it might be the most important master's thesis ever written. Shannon didn't stop there, by the way. Later in 1948, he published a mathematical theory of communication, which basically invented information theory. He figured out how to measure information mathematically. He defined the bit, binary digit, as the fundamental unit of information. Every text message you send, every song you stream, every video you watch, all of it is measured in bits, a concept Shannon defined. The entire digital world runs on ideas this one guy came up with. Now, while Shannon was connecting logic to circuits, someone else was connecting logic to computation at an even deeper level, Alan Turing. And this is where things get really profound. In 1936, Turing was a 23-year-old mathematician at Cambridge. He published a paper called On Computable Numbers, and in this paper, he described an imaginary machine, not a real machine, a thought experiment. He called it an automatic machine, but we now call it a Turing machine. Here's how it works. Imagine an infinitely long strip of tape divided into cells. Each cell has a symbol written on it. There's a head that can read the symbol in the current cell, write a new symbol, and move one cell left or right. And there's a set of rules that tell the machine what to do based on what it reads. That's it. It's absurdly simple. But Turing proved something astonishing about this simple machine. He proved that it could compute anything that is computable, any calculation, any algorithm, any logical process that can be defined step by step. This machine can do it. And then he went further. He described a universal Turing machine, a machine that could simulate any other Turing machine. Give it the right instructions, and it becomes any computer you want. This was the theoretical foundation for all of computing. Before anyone had built a real electronic computer, Turing had already figured out the limits of what computers could and couldn't do. He also proved that some problems are fundamentally unsolvable by any computer, the most famous being the halting problem. You cannot write a program that can look at any other program and always correctly determine whether it will eventually stop or run forever. There are limits to computation. Turing found them. Now here's what's important to understand about where we are in the story. By the late 1930s, all the theoretical pieces were in place. Boole had given us the math of logic. Shannon had shown how to build logic with electrical circuits. Turing had defined what computation is and what a universal computing machine would look like. The blueprints were ready. Babbage's dream from 100 years earlier was finally within reach. But theory is one thing. Actually building these machines is another. And as it turned out, the push to finally build real computers didn't come from curiosity or science or business. It came from the most destructive event in human history. World War II was about to turn theoretical computer science into actual computers. World War II changed everything, and I mean everything. It killed tens of millions of people. It reshaped borders and governments and entire civilizations, but it also accelerated technology at a pace nobody had ever seen before. And computing was right at the center of that acceleration, because it turns out when nations are fighting for survival, they suddenly find the money and motivation to build things that would have taken decades in peacetime. Let's start with someone most people have never heard of. Konrad Zuse. He was a German engineer living in Berlin in the 1930s. And while the rest of the world was still mostly thinking about computing in theoretical terms, Zuse was actually building computers in his parents' living room. Seriously, his parents' apartment in Berlin. His first machine, the Z1, was completed in 1938. It was mechanical, made from thousands of thin metal plates that he cut and assembled by hand. It didn't work very reliably. The metal parts kept jamming, but the design was sound. It used binary. It had a memory. It had a control unit. It was a real computer in concept, even if it didn't quite work in practice. The Z2 came next, using some electrical relays. And then in 1941, Zuse completed the Z3, and this one is a big deal. The Z3 was the world's first fully automatic programmable digital computer. It used telephone relays for its logic, about 2,600 of them. It could do floating point arithmetic. It read programs from punched film. It worked. Now here's the tragic part. Zuse was doing all of this with almost no support. The Nazi government didn't really understand what he was building or why it mattered. He applied for funding multiple times and was mostly ignored. Meanwhile, the Allies were pouring resources into computing projects. In 1943, the Z3 was destroyed when Allied bombs hit Berlin. Years of work gone in a single air raid. Zuse also created something called Plankelkool between 1942 and 1945. It was arguably the first high-level programming language ever designed, but it was never implemented during his lifetime. Nobody even published his work on it until the 1970s. Zuse spent the rest of the war working on the Z4 in a small town in the German countryside, literally hiding his computer from the chaos of the collapsing Third Reich. If the world had been paying attention to what Zuse was doing, the history of computing might have looked very different. But the world was busy fighting a war. and the real resources were going to projects in Britain and America. Speaking of Britain, we need to talk about Bletchley Park. This was a country estate about 50 miles north of London that the British government turned into a top-secret code-breaking center during the war. And what happened there is one of the most important and least-known stories of the 20th century. The Germans were using sophisticated encryption machines to communicate military orders. The more famous one is the Enigma machine, which you've probably heard of. Alan Turing and others at Bletchley Park worked on breaking Enigma using electromechanical machines called bombs. That's a whole story in itself. But there was another German cipher that was even more important and even harder to crack. It was called the Lorenz cipher. The British codenamed it Tunny. Tunny was used for top-level communications, messages between Hitler and his generals, strategic orders about troop movements and battle plans, the highest-level military intelligence you could possibly intercept. And cracking it required something that had never existed before, a programmable electronic computer. Enter Tommy Flowers, and this is a name that doesn't get nearly enough recognition. Flowers was a telephone engineer at the General Post Office in London, not a university professor, not a famous mathematician, a telephone engineer, but he understood electronics better than almost anyone alive. And when the code breakers at Bletchley Park needed a machine fast enough to crack Tunny, Flowers said he could build one. His proposal was met with skepticism. He wanted to use around 1,500 vacuum tubes, valves as the British called them. Everyone thought that was crazy. Vacuum tubes were considered unreliable. Having that many in one machine seemed like a recipe for constant breakdowns. The advisors at Bletchley Park didn't think it would work. Some thought the war would be over before Flowers could even finish building it. But Flowers knew something the doubters didn't. He knew from his experience with telephone systems that vacuum tubes were actually quite reliable as long as you left them running. Most failures happened when you turned them on and off, because the heating and cooling stressed the components. Keep them on all the time and they'd run fine. So that's what he did. Flowers and his team built Colossus in 11 months. The first one, Colossus Mark I, was working by December 1943 and operational at Bletchley Park by February 1944. It used 1,500 vacuum tubes. It could process 5,000 characters per second by reading paper tape at incredible speed. It was programmable through plug boards and switches. You could reconfigure it for different code-breaking tasks. It was the world's first programmable electronic digital computer, and it got better. Colossus Mark II came along in June 1944, just in time for D-Day. It was 5 times faster than the original, and here's why that timing matters. The intelligence gathered through Colossus confirmed that the German High Command believed the Allied invasion would come at Pas-de-Calais, not Normandy. The Allies knew that their deception campaign was working. That intelligence directly contributed to the success of the D-Day landings, which was the beginning of the end of the war in Europe. By the end of the war, 10 Colossus machines were operating at Bletchley Park. Winston Churchill called the Bletchley Park code breakers the geese that laid the golden eggs and never cackled. And that last part is key, never cackled. Because after the war, the existence of Colossus was classified. 8 of the 10 machines were destroyed. Tommy Flowers was ordered to burn his blueprints. Everyone who worked on the project was sworn to secrecy. For decades, nobody knew. The story of Colossus didn't start coming out until the 1970s and wasn't fully declassified until the 2000s, which means that for most of the 20th century, when people talked about the first computers, they talked about ENIAC because they didn't know Colossus existed. So let's talk about ENIAC, the Electronic Numerical Integrator and Computer, built at the University of Pennsylvania by John Mauchly and J. Presper Eckert. This thing was a monster. 17,468 vacuum tubes, 70,000 resistors, 10,000 capacitors, 6,000 switches. It weighed 30 tons and filled an entire 1,800 square foot room. When they turned it on, legend says the lights in Philadelphia dimmed. That's probably not true, but it gives you a sense of how much power this machine consumed. ENIAC was originally built to calculate artillery firing tables for the US Army. During the war, soldiers in the field needed to know the exact angle to aim their guns based on distance, wind, temperature, altitude, all sorts of variables. Human computers were doing these calculations by hand, and it was taking weeks to produce a single firing table. ENIAC could do the same calculation in about 30 seconds. Here's something important that often gets overlooked. ENIAC was programmed by 6 women: Kay McNulty, Betty Jennings, Betty Snyder, Marlon Westcoff, Fran Belis, and Ruth Lichterman. They were originally hired as human computers doing calculations by hand. When ENIAC was built, they were chosen to figure out how to program it. And keep in mind, there were no programming languages, no manuals, no tutorials. They studied ENIAC's blueprints and circuit diagrams and basically taught themselves how the machine worked from the inside out. They had to physically rewire the machine for each new problem. Pulling cables, flipping switches, configuring connections. Programming in the 1940s was a full-body workout. These women were pioneers, and for a long time, history barely remembered their names. ENIAC was unveiled to the public in February 1946, and it captured the world's imagination. Newspapers called it the giant brain. People were fascinated and a little terrified. A machine that could think, or at least calculate really fast. Now, around this same time, a mathematician named John von Neumann got involved, and he made a contribution that shaped every computer built after. Von Neumann proposed what's now called the stored program concept. The idea is simple but revolutionary. Store the program instructions in the same memory as the data. Before this, computers like ENIAC had to be physically rewired to change programs. That took days. With a stored program, you could just load different instructions into memory, and the same machine could do completely different tasks without any rewiring. The architecture von Neumann described: a central processing unit, a memory unit, input devices, and output devices, all connected and sharing memory for both programs and data. This became the template for basically every computer since. Your laptop follows von Neumann architecture. Your phone does. The servers running the internet do. It's been almost 80 years, and we're still using his basic design. The first computer to actually run a stored program was the Manchester Baby in 1948, built at the University of Manchester in England. It was a small experimental machine, but it proved the concept worked. From that point on, computer development accelerated rapidly. Now, I need to talk about what happened to Alan Turing after the war, because it's one of the most tragic stories in the history of science. After Bletchley Park, Turing worked on designing computers at the National Physical Laboratory and later at the University of Manchester. In 1950, he published a paper asking the question, can machines think? He proposed what's now called the Turing test. If a human is having a conversation with a machine and can't tell whether they're talking to a machine or another human, then the machine can be considered intelligent. This idea is still debated today. It's still relevant, especially now with AI chatbots everywhere. But in 1952, Turing was prosecuted by the British government for being gay. Homosexuality was a criminal offense in Britain at the time. He was convicted and given a choice between prison and chemical castration. He chose chemical castration. The hormonal treatment caused him physical and psychological suffering. On June 7, 1954, Alan Turing was found dead. He was 41 years old. The official cause of death was cyanide poisoning. An apple with a bite taken out of it was found next to him, though it was never tested for cyanide. The coroner ruled it a suicide, though some people, including his mother, believed it was an accidental poisoning from chemicals he was using in experiments. In 2009, the British government issued a formal apology. In 2013, Queen Elizabeth II granted Turing a posthumous pardon. In 2021, the Bank of England put his face on the £50 note. One of the greatest minds in human history, a person who helped win World War II, who laid the theoretical foundations of computer science, who asked the first serious questions about artificial intelligence, was driven to his death because of who he loved, and the computers he helped create, the machines that process information using the principles he defined. Those machines are now everywhere, in every pocket, on every desk, running the entire modern world. He never got to see any of it. The war was over. The first computers existed, and now the question was, what do we do with them? So the war is over, computers exist, but there's a big problem. These machines are enormous, expensive, and kind of a nightmare to maintain. ENIAC had almost 18,000 vacuum tubes, and those tubes were constantly burning out. The machine was non-functional about half the time because something was always breaking. Engineers got the failure rate down to about 1 tube every 2 days, which was considered a huge improvement. But still, imagine your computer crashing every 48 hours because a glass tube inside it literally died. That was the reality of computing in the late 1940s. Vacuum tubes were also hot, like really hot. You needed massive cooling systems. ENIAC consumed 150 kilowatts of power. The rooms housing these computers had to be air-conditioned, which was expensive, and the machines themselves were gigantic. Nobody was putting a vacuum tube computer on a desk. These things filled entire rooms, sometimes entire floors of buildings. So the question was obvious: how do we make these things smaller, more reliable, and less power-hungry? And the answer came from Bell Labs in New Jersey on December 23, 1947. 3 physicists, William Shockley, John Bardeen, and Walter Brattain, demonstrated the first transistor, a tiny device made from semiconductor material that could do the same job as a vacuum tube, but was smaller, faster, cooler, more reliable, and used way less power. The transistor is basically an electrically controlled switch. Apply a small electrical signal and it switches on. Remove the signal and it switches off. On and off, 1 and 0, true and false. Sound familiar? It's Boolean logic in physical form. Except now, instead of a hot, fragile glass tube the size of your thumb, you've got a little solid-state device that barely uses any power and almost never breaks. The 3 inventors won the Nobel Prize in Physics in 1956, but the story behind the scenes wasn't exactly a happy collaboration. Shockley was the team leader and by most accounts a brilliant but deeply unpleasant person. When Bardeen and Brattain made the initial breakthrough, Shockley felt left out. He went off and developed an improved version, the junction transistor, partly to make sure his name was on the discovery. He later started his own company, Shockley Semiconductor, in Mountain View, California. He recruited some of the best young engineers in the country and then proceeded to be such a terrible manager that 8 of them quit and started their own company. Those 8 engineers became known as the Traitorous 8, and the company they founded was Fairchild Semiconductor. One of those 8, Robert Noyce, would later co-found Intel. So Shockley's terrible management skills accidentally gave birth to Silicon Valley. Sometimes things work out in weird ways. Now transistors were great, but they were still individual components. You had to wire them together one by one with other components, like resistors and capacitors, to build circuits. As circuits got more complex with thousands of components, the wiring itself became a problem. Too many connections, too many chances for something to go wrong. In 1958, Jack Kilby at Texas Instruments had an idea. What if you could put multiple transistors and all the connecting wires on a single piece of semiconductor material, build the whole circuit on one chip? He demonstrated this in September 1958. It was rough and messy, but it worked. Meanwhile, Robert Noyce at Fairchild Semiconductor independently came up with the same idea, but with a better manufacturing method, using silicon and a planar process that was easier to mass produce. 2 people at 2 different companies solving the same problem at almost the same time. This happens surprisingly often in the history of technology. Kilby won the Nobel Prize in Physics in 2000. Noyce had already died by then, so he couldn't share in it, but both are credited as co-inventors of the integrated circuit. The integrated circuit or microchip changed everything. Now you could put dozens, then hundreds, then thousands of transistors on a tiny piece of silicon. Circuits that used to fill a room could fit on your fingertip. And here's the crazy part. They kept getting smaller. In 1965, Gordon Moore, who was at Fairchild and would later co-found Intel with Noyce, made an observation. He noticed that the number of transistors you could fit on a chip was doubling roughly every 2 years, and he predicted this trend would continue. This became known as Moore's Law. It's not really a law of physics. It's more of an observation about the pace of engineering progress, but it held true for decades. In 1971, the Intel 4004 chip had 2,300 transistors. Today, a modern processor has billions of tiny switches on a piece of silicon smaller than your thumbnail. Moore's Law is the reason the phone in your pocket is millions of times more powerful than the room-sized computers of the 1940s. While chips were getting smaller, computers were getting into the business world. IBM dominated this era. Their mainframe computers, machines like the IBM System 360, launched in 1964, became the backbone of corporate and government computing. Banks ran on IBM mainframes. Airlines used them for reservations. Governments used them for everything from census data to military planning. These were massive, expensive machines that lived in special air-conditioned rooms and were tended to by specialized technicians. If you wanted to use a mainframe in the 1960s, you didn't sit down at a keyboard. You wrote your program on punch cards, handed the stack of cards to an operator, and came back hours or even days later to get your results. If you made a single typo on one card, you had to fix it and resubmit the whole stack. It was tedious and slow, but things were starting to change. Time-sharing systems let multiple people use one computer simultaneously through terminals. Programming languages like Fortran and COBOL made it easier to write software, and a woman named Grace Hopper deserves special mention here. She was a U.S. Navy officer and computer scientist who invented the first compiler, a program that translates human-readable code into machine language. She also helped develop COBOL, which became the most widely used business programming language for decades. And she's credited with popularizing the term debugging after her team found an actual moth stuck in a relay of the Harvard Mark II computer, causing it to malfunction. They taped the moth into the logbook with the note first actual case of bug being found. For most ordinary people in the 1950s and 60s, computers were these mysterious things that existed behind locked doors in air-conditioned rooms. You'd never touch one. You'd never see one. They were tools for governments, corporations, and universities. The idea that a regular person might own a computer would have sounded absurd, like saying a regular person might own a jet fighter. But that was about to change. So here's where things start moving really fast. Up until the 1970s, computers were big, expensive, and locked away in institutions. Regular people didn't use computers. Regular people didn't even think about computers. But a handful of hobbyists and dreamers in California were about to change that. And the way it happened is one of the best stories in the history of technology. It starts with the microprocessor. In 1971, a team at Intel led by Ted Hoff and Federico Fagan created the Intel 4004. This was the first commercially available microprocessor, an entire central processing unit on a single chip. The thing that used to fill a room now fit on a piece of silicon about the size of your fingernail. And here's the funny part. It was originally designed for a Japanese calculator company called Busicom. They just needed a chip for a desktop calculator. Intel made the chip, realized it could do way more than just calculator math, and negotiated to keep the rights to sell it to other customers. Busicom probably didn't think much of it at the time. That turned out to be a very expensive mistake. The Intel 8080 came along in 1974, and that's the chip that really opened the door. It was powerful enough to be the brain of a real computer. And in January 1975, A small company in Albuquerque, New Mexico called MITS put a computer kit on the cover of Popular Electronics magazine. The Altair 8800, you had to assemble it yourself. When you were done, you had a metal box with toggle switches on the front and a row of blinking lights. No keyboard, no screen, no storage. You programmed it by flipping switches one at a time, entering binary code. To see the output, you read the pattern of lights. This thing could barely do anything useful, but it was a real computer, and you could own one. It cost $397 as a kit, and it sold like crazy. My TS was flooded with orders. They couldn't keep up with demand. Something about the idea of owning your own computer captured people's imaginations. Now, two young guys saw that Popular Electronics cover and it changed their lives. Bill Gates and Paul Allen. They were old friends. Gates was a student at Harvard. Allen was working at Honeywell in Boston. They contacted MITS and said they had a version of the basic programming language that would run on the Altair. They did not actually have the software. They hadn't written a single line of it, but they figured they could build it before MITS found out. They spent the next few weeks frantically writing code. Allen flew to Albuquerque to demonstrate it. He had never actually tested it on a real Altair. He loaded the paper tape. The machine churned for a while, and it worked. First try, they got the contract, and that was the beginning of Microsoft. One of the biggest companies in the history of the world started with two guys bluffing about software they hadn't written yet. Meanwhile, out in California, something else was brewing. There was a group called the Homebrew Computer Club. It met in a garage in Menlo Park. Engineers, hobbyists, tinkerers, people who were just obsessed with the idea of personal computing. They'd show off projects, share ideas, pass around circuit diagrams. It was scrappy and informal and kind of beautiful. And one of the members was a young engineer named Steve Wozniak. Wozniak was a genuine hardware genius. He could design circuits in his head that would take other engineers days to work out on paper. For fun, he designed a computer, just because he wanted to see if he could build one that was simple and elegant and affordable. He showed it to his friend Steve Jobs. And Jobs, who was not an engineer but had an extraordinary sense for business and design, said we should sell this. In 1976, they founded Apple Computer. The Apple. I was a circuit board. You had to supply your own case, keyboard, and monitor. They built them in Jobs' parents' garage. They sold about 200 of them. Not exactly a revolution yet. But then came the Apple II in 1977, and this one changed everything. The Apple II was a complete computer in a nice plastic case. It had a keyboard built in. It could display color graphics, which was almost unheard of. It had sound. It had expansion slots, so you could add capabilities. And critically, it had a floppy disk drive, which meant you could actually save and load programs and data easily. The Apple II became the first truly successful mass-market personal computer. Schools bought them, small businesses bought them, families bought them, and when a program called VisiCalc came out in 1979, the first spreadsheet application, that sealed the deal for business adoption. Suddenly, accountants and managers had a reason to want a computer on their desk. VisiCalc alone probably sold more Apple IIs than any amount of advertising could have. Now IBM had been watching all this from the sidelines. Big Blue, as they were called, had dominated mainframe computing for decades. Personal computers seemed like toys to them. But by 1980, it was clear this market was real and growing fast, so IBM decided to get in. They put together a small team in Boca Raton, Florida, and gave them 1 year to build a personal computer. To move fast, the team made a decision that would reshape the entire industry. Instead of building everything from scratch like IBM usually did, they used off-the-shelf components, an Intel processor, and for the operating system, they went to Microsoft. Here's where it gets interesting. Microsoft didn't actually have an operating system ready. Bill Gates went out and bought one from a Seattle programmer named Tim Patterson for about $50,000. It was called QDOS, which stood for Quick and Dirty Operating System. Microsoft cleaned it up, renamed it MS-DOS, and licensed it to IBM. And here's the key word: licensed. Gates didn't sell DOS to IBM. He licensed it, which meant Microsoft kept the rights to sell it to other companies too. IBM agreed to this because they didn't think the operating system was the valuable part. They thought the IBM brand name was what mattered. That turned out to be one of the most consequential business decisions of the 20th century, maybe ever, because once other companies started making IBM-compatible computers, which happened almost immediately, they all needed DOS, and they all got it from Microsoft. Bill Gates became the richest person in the world largely because of that one licensing deal. The IBM PC launched in 1981, and because it used open architecture, anyone could build compatible hardware. Compaq released the first IBM-compatible clone in 1982. Then dozens of other companies followed. The market exploded. IBM had accidentally created an open standard. They owned the design, but they couldn't stop others from copying it. The clones were often cheaper than the real thing. Within a few years, IBM was losing market share in the market they created. Meanwhile, Apple was going in the opposite direction. In 1984, they released the Macintosh, and the Mac introduced something that would change computing forever: a graphical user interface. Instead of typing commands into a black screen, you had windows and icons and menus and a mouse. You could point at things and click on them, drag files around, see your documents on screen the way they'd look when printed. Now, Apple didn't invent the graphical user interface. That credit goes to Xerox PARC, the Palo Alto Research Center. In the 1970s, researchers at PARC had developed the mouse, the graphical interface, Ethernet networking, the laser printer, and object-oriented programming. They basically invented modern computing, and then Xerox did almost nothing with any of it. Steve Jobs visited PARC in 1979 and saw the graphical interface and reportedly said something like, "Why aren't you doing something with this?" He went back to Apple and built the Macintosh around that concept. The story of Xerox PARC is one of the great tragedies in tech history. They had the future sitting right there in their lab. They just didn't realize it. Through the late 80s and into the 90s, the PC market grew massive. Windows 3.0 in 1990 brought the graphical interface to IBM-compatible PCs. Windows 95 was a cultural event. Microsoft spent $300 million on marketing, including a launch party where they paid the Rolling Stones for the rights to use Start Me Up. People lined up outside stores at midnight to buy it. An operating system. People stood in line for an operating system. That's how excited the world was about personal computers. By the mid-1990s, computers were everywhere. Homes, offices, schools, libraries. The beige box on a desk became a symbol of modern life, but something even bigger was coming. These computers were about to get connected to each other, and that would change the world more than the computers themselves ever did. So computers were getting smaller and cheaper, and millions of people had them. But they were all isolated. Your computer sat on your desk and it didn't talk to anyone else's computer. It was like having a telephone that could only call itself. Useful, but limited. The thing that turned personal computers from really fancy typewriters into the most transformative technology in human history was connecting them together. And that story starts with the US military. In the late 1960s, the Department of Defense had a problem. Their communication systems were centralized. If the Soviets took out one hub, the whole network would go down. Not great when you're in a nuclear standoff. They needed a communication network with no single point of failure. A network where information could find its way from point A to point B, even if parts of the network were destroyed. The solution was packet switching. Instead of sending a message as one continuous stream, you break it into small packets. Each packet can take a different route through the network. When they all arrive at the destination, they get reassembled into the original message. If one route is blocked, the packets just find another way. This idea was developed independently by Paul Baran in the US and Donald Davies in Britain. It's the fundamental principle that the internet still runs on today. In 1969, the Advanced Research Projects Agency part of the Department of Defense, built ARPANET. The first version connected just 4 computers: UCLA, Stanford, UC Santa Barbara, and the University of Utah. On October 29, 1969, a programmer at UCLA named Charlie Klein tried to send the first message over ARPANET to Stanford. He was trying to type the word Logan. He got as far as LO, and then the system crashed. So the first message ever sent over what would eventually become the internet was just the letters LO. Not exactly inspiring, but they fixed the problem, and an hour later, the full login message went through. Through the 1970s, ARPANET grew. More universities and research institutions connected. In 1971, a programmer named Ray Tomlinson sent the first email. He needed a way to address messages to people on different computers, so he used the AWOW symbol to separate the username from the computer name. That's why every email address in the world has an AWR in it, because one programmer needed a symbol that wasn't already being used for anything else, and picked that one. But ARPANET was just one network. There were other networks popping up around the world using different protocols. They couldn't talk to each other. It was like having a bunch of phone systems where AT&T customers could only call other AT&T customers, and Verizon customers could only call Verizon. Not very useful. Vint Cerf and Bob Kahn solved this. They developed TCP/IP, Transmission Control Protocol, and Internet Protocol. This was a universal set of rules for how any computer on any network could communicate with any other computer on any other network. Think of it like a universal language for computers. It didn't matter what kind of computer you had or what network you were on. If you used TCP/IP, you could connect. On January 1st, 1983, ARPANET officially switched to TCP/IP. Some people call this the birthday of the internet, and gradually other networks joined. The interconnected network, the internet. But here's the thing. The internet in the 1980s was still mostly a tool for researchers and the military. It was text-based and hard to use. There was email. There were discussion groups. You could transfer files, but there was no web. No websites, no clicking on links, no images. Using the internet required technical knowledge. Normal people had no reason to go anywhere near it. That changed because of one person, Tim Berners-Lee. He was a British physicist working at CERN, the particle physics laboratory in Switzerland. In 1989, he had a problem. CERN had thousands of researchers from all over the world, and they needed a way to share documents and information easily. Berners-Lee proposed a system that used hypertext, text with clickable links that could take you to other documents. He didn't just propose it, he built it. He invented HTML, the language used to create web pages. He invented HTTP, the protocol for transferring those pages over the internet. He created URLs, the addresses that tell your browser where to find a page. He built the first web browser and the first web server. He basically invented the World Wide Web by himself. Now this is important. The internet and the World Wide Web are not the same thing. People use the terms interchangeably, but they're different. The internet is the infrastructure, the cables and protocols and connections that link computers together. The web is what you see, the pages, the links, the websites, the content. The internet existed before the web. The web runs on top of the internet. Berners-Lee invented the web. The first website went live on August 6, 1991. And here's the part that gets me. Berners-Lee gave it all away. He didn't patent any of it. He didn't charge licensing fees. He made it free and open for anyone to use. The World Wide Web, which now generates trillions of dollars in economic activity and has fundamentally reshaped human civilization, was given to humanity as a gift. If Berners-Lee had patented his inventions, he would probably be the richest person who ever lived. He chose not to. Think about that for a second. The web took off fast. In 1993, a browser called Mosaic made it easy for regular people to browse the web with a graphical interface. Click on links, see images, navigate with a mouse. Netscape Navigator followed in 1994 and became massively popular. Microsoft saw the threat and bundled Internet Explorer with Windows, basically giving it away for free to crush Netscape. The browser wars had begun, and then came the dot-com boom. Once the web existed, businesses realized they could sell things online, advertise online, build entire companies online. Money poured in. Amazon started selling books in 1994 from Jeff Bezos's garage. eBay launched in 1995 as a way to auction stuff online. Yahoo became the most popular way to find things on the web. And in 1998, two Stanford graduate students named Larry Page and Sergey Brin launched Google with a better way to search the internet. The late 1990s were wild. Startups with no revenue and no real business plan were getting billions of dollars in investment. Everyone was convinced the internet would change everything, and they weren't wrong about that. But they were wrong about which companies would survive. Pets.com spent millions on advertising, including a Super Bowl ad, and went bankrupt within a year. Webvan tried to deliver groceries and burned through over $1 billion before collapsing. Hundreds of dot-com companies imploded. The bubble burst in 2000. Stock markets crashed. Trillions of dollars in value evaporated. A lot of people lost a lot of money, but the companies that survived, Amazon, Google, eBay, they came out stronger. And the internet itself didn't go anywhere. It just kept growing. More people got online. Broadband replaced dial-up. Websites got better. The infrastructure got faster. And then something happened that nobody quite predicted. People started using the internet not just to consume information, but to create it. Blogs exploded in the early 2000s. Wikipedia launched in 2001 and became the world's largest encyclopedia, written entirely by volunteers. YouTube launched in 2005, letting anyone upload and share video. Facebook started in Mark Zuckerberg's dorm room in 2004 as a site for Harvard students, and within a few years, it had hundreds of millions of users. Twitter launched in 2006, Instagram in 2010. Social media changed everything. How we communicate, how we get news, how we organize, how we argue, how we date, how we shop, how we think about ourselves. Whether all of that change has been positive is a question we're still trying to answer. There are real concerns about privacy, misinformation, mental health, addiction, political manipulation. The tools that connected the world also made it easier to deceive, harass, and surveil people. The internet gave us amazing things. It also gave us some genuinely scary things, and we're still figuring out the balance. But we need to keep moving, because while all this was happening, something else was going on in your pocket. Before we talk about the iPhone, we need to acknowledge that smartphones didn't appear out of nowhere. People had been trying to put computers in their pockets for years. Palm Pilots showed up in the mid-1990s. These were little handheld devices with touchscreens and styluses that could store contacts and calendars and notes. BlackBerry came along in 1999 and gave business people email on the go. That little physical keyboard became iconic. For a while, if you were important, you had a BlackBerry. It was a status symbol. Nokia was making phones that could do basic internet browsing. Windows Mobile was trying to shrink the PC experience onto a tiny screen. There were devices that combined phones with PDAs. They worked, sort of, but nobody was calling them revolutionary. They were useful tools for business people. Regular people didn't really care. And then on January 9th, 2007, Steve Jobs walked onto a stage in San Francisco and said, "Today, Apple is going to reinvent the phone." And the crazy thing is, he wasn't exaggerating. Jobs started the presentation by saying Apple was introducing 3 products: a widescreen iPod with touch controls, a revolutionary mobile phone, and a breakthrough internet communications device. He repeated these 3 things a few times while the audience applauded each one. And then he smiled and said, "These are not 3 separate devices. This is one device." The crowd went nuts. The iPhone had a large touchscreen with no physical keyboard. You interacted with it by touching the screen directly, pinching to zoom, swiping to scroll, tapping icons, multi-touch gestures that felt natural and intuitive. It ran a real operating system. It had a real web browser that showed actual web pages, not the stripped-down mobile versions other phones used. It could play music and video, and it looked beautiful. Jobs and Apple's design team had obsessed over every detail. The first iPhone launched in June 2007, and people camped outside Apple stores overnight to buy one. But honestly, the first iPhone was kind of limited. It couldn't run third-party apps. There was no app store, no copy and paste. The camera was only 2 megapixels. The internet was slow running on 2G networks. In some ways, it was worse than existing smartphones in terms of pure features. But none of that mattered because the experience of using it was completely different from anything else. It felt like the future, and Apple fixed the limitations fast. In 2008, they launched the App Store, and that's when everything really changed. Now anyone could build software for the iPhone and sell it to millions of people. The App Store created entire industries overnight. Uber, Instagram, Snapchat, WhatsApp, Spotify on mobile gaming, food delivery apps. None of these would exist without the App Store model. Google saw what was happening and responded with Android. They had actually acquired a small company called Android back in 2005 before the iPhone was announced. When Android launched in 2008 on the HTC Dream, it was rougher than the iPhone, less polished, but it was open source. Any phone manufacturer could use it and modify it. Samsung, LG, Motorola, HTC, they all adopted Android. And the same pattern that played out with PCs played out again. Apple controlled both the hardware and software, creating a premium closed ecosystem. Google provided the open platform that everyone else could use. Android won market share. Apple won profits. Today, Android runs on about 72% of the world's smartphones. Apple has most of the remaining 28%, but captures the majority of the industry's profits. But the bigger story isn't really about Apple versus Google. It's about what smartphones did to everything else. Think about all the things a smartphone replaced. Cameras, alarm clocks, calculators, maps, flashlights, newspapers, magazines, calendars, address books, music players, video cameras, voice recorders, GPS devices, boarding passes, wallets. Increasingly, countless separate devices and objects collapsed into one thing in your pocket. Smartphones changed photography. Everyone became a photographer. Billions of photos taken every day. They changed navigation. Nobody uses paper maps anymore. They changed banking. You can deposit a check by taking a picture of it. They changed how we read, how we listen to music, how we watch video, how we shop, how we communicate. For billions of people around the world, the smartphone is their first and only computer. They've never owned a laptop or a desktop. The phone is everything. A smartphone from today has more computing power than all of NASA had during the Apollo program. The guidance computer that took astronauts to the moon ran at about 0.043 megahertz. Your phone runs at several gigahertz. That's roughly 100,000 times faster. You carry a genuine supercomputer in your pocket everywhere you go, and you mostly use it to scroll through social media and watch videos at 2 a.m. No judgment. We all do it. The smartphone revolution happened so fast that it's easy to forget how recent it is. The first iPhone was less than 20 years ago. In that time, pocket computers went from luxury novelty to essential tool for over 4 billion people on the planet. That might be the fastest adoption of any technology in human history. And all these billions of connected devices created something new, an unimaginable flood of data. And to handle that data, we needed something bigger than any single computer. We needed the cloud. So you've probably heard the term the cloud about 1,000 times by now. Everything's in the cloud. Your photos are in the cloud. Your documents are in the cloud. But what actually is the cloud? Because it sounds like this magical floating thing, but it's not. It's just other people's computers. Seriously. When someone says your data is in the cloud, what they mean is your data is stored on a server in a warehouse somewhere, probably in Virginia or Oregon or Ireland. A massive building full of thousands of computers running 24 hours a day with backup power generators and cooling systems and security guards. Amazon Web Services, or AWS, is the biggest cloud provider in the world. And the funny thing is, it started almost by accident. Amazon had built all this computing infrastructure to run their online store, especially during peak times like the holidays. For most of the year, a lot of that capacity was sitting idle. So around 2006, they started renting it out. Hey, you need computing power, but don't want to buy your own servers? Use ours. Pay by the hour. That became AWS, and it's now one of the most profitable businesses on the planet. Netflix runs on AWS, so do thousands of other companies. There's a decent chance that whatever app you used most recently was running on Amazon's computers. Microsoft has Azure. Google has Google Cloud. The cloud computing market is worth hundreds of billions of dollars, and the basic idea is simple. Instead of buying and maintaining your own computers, you rent computing power from someone else. This means a tiny startup with 3 people can access the same computing infrastructure as a giant corporation. You don't need a server room. You don't need IT staff to maintain hardware. You just pay for what you use. This democratized computing power in a way that nobody really predicted. The cloud also enabled something else, big data. Every time you search for something on Google, that's data. Every time you tap on a video, buy something online, use GPS navigation, like a post, send a message, that's data, and it adds up fast. Humanity generates somewhere around 400 million terabytes of data every single day. That number is almost impossible to comprehend. If you stored it all on DVDs, the stack would reach the moon and back multiple times. Companies figured out that this data is incredibly valuable. If you know what millions of people are searching for and buying and clicking on, you can predict behavior. You can target advertising with scary precision. You can optimize supply chains. You can spot trends before they become obvious. The phrase data is the new oil became a cliche, but there's truth in it. Of course, there's a darker side. All that data collection means companies know an enormous amount about you, where you go, what you buy, who you talk to, what you search for at 3 a.m. The Cambridge Analytica scandal in 2018 showed how personal data from Facebook could be harvested and used for political manipulation. Data breaches expose millions of people's private information regularly. There's a real tension between the convenience of connected services and the privacy you give up to use them. And we're still nowhere near resolving that tension. And it's not just your phone and laptop generating data anymore. Your thermostat is connected to the internet. Your doorbell has a camera. Your watch tracks your heart rate and sleep patterns and location. Your car knows where you drive. Your fridge might know what you eat. This is the Internet of Things. Billions of devices with sensors and processors and network connections embedded in everyday objects. Your light bulb probably has more computing power than the Apollo guidance computer. That's not a joke. That's literally true. We've gone from computers being rare, expensive machines locked in special rooms to computers being in literally everything. Your toaster might have a processor in it. The world is saturated with computing, and most of it is invisible. You don't think about the computers in your car, or your microwave, or your elevator. They just work silently in the background, running the systems that keep modern life functioning. And now, all of that data and all of that computing power is being fed into something that might be the biggest development in the history of computing since the computer itself, artificial intelligence. Okay, so the dream of making machines that can think is almost as old as computers themselves. The moment people built the first calculating machines, somebody asked the question, could a machine actually think? Not just calculate, think, reason, understand. And for most of the history of computing, the answers seem to be not yet, but soon, always just around the corner. Until suddenly, it wasn't just around the corner anymore. It was here. Let's go back to the beginning. In 1950, Alan Turing published a paper where he asked, "Can machines think?" He proposed a test. If you're having a conversation with something through text and you can't tell whether you're talking to a human or a machine, then the machine can be considered intelligent. This became the Turing test, and people have been arguing about it ever since. Is fooling a human the same as actually thinking? Probably not, but it gave people a concrete way to talk about machine intelligence. In 1956, a group of researchers organized a summer workshop at Dartmouth College in New Hampshire. John McCarthy, Marvin Minsky, Claude Shannon, who we talked about earlier, and a few others. McCarthy coined the term artificial intelligence for the workshop. The proposal was incredibly optimistic. They basically said, "Give us a summer and we'll make significant progress on getting machines to think." They thought the problem was solvable in the near term. They were wrong by about 60 years, but the field of AI was officially born. The early decades of AI were a mix of genuine progress and wildly unrealistic expectations. Researchers built programs that could play checkers and chess at a basic level. They built systems that could prove mathematical theorems. They built ELIZA in 1966, a simple chatbot that pretended to be a therapist by rephrasing your own statements as questions. People were surprised by how convincing ELIZA felt, even though it understood nothing. It was just pattern matching. But the hard problems turned out to be really hard. Language understanding, visual perception, common sense reasoning, things that a 5-year-old can do effortlessly, turned out to be incredibly difficult for computers. You can teach a computer to multiply million-digit numbers in a fraction of a second, but getting it to understand the sentence, "The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak," that's a nightmare. By the 1970s, reality had set in. Progress was slower than promised. Funding got cut. Researchers moved to other fields. This period is called the first AI winter. The hype had outrun the results, and people got burned. There was a revival in the 1980s with expert systems. The idea was to capture human expertise in specific domains as a set of rules. If the patient has a fever and a cough and chest pain, then consider pneumonia. These systems worked in narrow domains. Some were commercially successful, but they were brittle. They couldn't handle situations outside their programmed rules. They couldn't learn. They couldn't adapt, and building them required painstakingly interviewing experts and coding thousands of rules by hand. By the late 1980s, the expert systems bubble had burst. Second AI winter. For about 15 years, AI was kind of a dirty word in computer science. If you wanted funding for your research, you didn't call it AI. You called it machine learning, or pattern recognition, or data mining. Same ideas, different branding. But quietly, something was changing. 3 things were converging that would make AI actually work. First, the internet was generating massive amounts of data: text, images, video, billions of examples of human language and behavior. Second, computers were getting enormously more powerful, especially with graphics processing units, or GPUs, which turned out to be really good at the kind of parallel math that AI needs. Third, researchers were refining algorithms, especially a technique called deep learning, which uses artificial neural networks with many layers. Neural networks aren't a new idea. The basic concept goes back to the 1940s and 50s. The idea is loosely inspired by how biological brains work. You have layers of artificial neurons connected to each other. Data comes in through the input layer, passes through hidden layers where it gets processed and transformed, and comes out through the output layer as a result. The network learns by adjusting the strength of the connections between neurons based on whether it got the right answer. For decades, neural networks didn't work very well because we didn't have enough data to train them or enough computing power to run them. But by the 2010s, both problems were solved, and the results were dramatic. In 2012, a neural network called AlexNet entered the ImageNet competition, a contest where AI systems try to correctly identify objects in photographs. AlexNet demolished the competition. Its error rate was almost half that of the next best system. This was the moment the AI community realized deep learning was the real deal. After that, progress was explosive. Every year, the systems got better. Image recognition, speech recognition, language translation, game playing. In 2016, DeepMind's AlphaGo beat Lee Sedol, the world champion at Go. Now, Go is not like chess. Chess has about 10 to the 120 possible games, which is already a ridiculously large number. Go has about 10 to the 700. The number of possible Go positions is greater than the number of atoms in the observable universe. Experts had predicted it would take at least another decade before AI could beat a top Go player. AlphaGo did it in 2016, and it did it by playing millions of games against itself and learning strategies that no human had ever conceived. During one game, it made a move that commentators said no human player would ever make. It looked like a mistake. It turned out to be brilliant. Then came large language models, and everything went to another level. These are AI systems trained on enormous amounts of text from the internet. Books, articles, websites, conversations, code, everything. By processing all this text, the models learn patterns of language and knowledge. They can write essays, answer questions, translate languages, write computer code, summarize documents, have conversations. In November 2022, OpenAI released ChatGPT, and it became the fastest growing consumer application in history at the time. Within 2 months, it had over 100 million users. Suddenly, AI wasn't just a research topic. It was something regular people were using every day. Students were using it for homework. Programmers were using it to write code. Writers were using it for brainstorming. Businesses were scrambling to integrate it into everything. Google responded with Gemini. Anthropic built Claude. Meta released open source models. The AI race was on, and it was moving at a speed that shocked even the people building these systems. Now here's where we need to be honest. Nobody fully understands how these large language models work. We know the architecture, we know the training process, but the internal representations, how the model actually processes and generates language, that's still being figured out. When a language model gives you a surprisingly insightful answer, nobody can point to exactly why it said that. This is both fascinating and a little unsettling, and the concerns are real. AI can generate convincing misinformation. It can create deepfake images and videos. It could displace millions of jobs. There are serious questions about bias, since these systems learn from human-generated data, which contains all of our prejudices. There's the alignment problem. How do you make sure an increasingly powerful AI system actually does what you want it to do, and not something else entirely? Some researchers think we're on a path toward artificial general intelligence, AI that can match or exceed human-level thinking across all domains. Others think we're nowhere close, and current systems are just very sophisticated pattern matchers with no real understanding. The truth is, nobody knows for sure. We're in genuinely uncharted territory. What is clear is that AI is already changing the world. Drug discovery is being accelerated. Scientific research is being transformed. DeepMind's AlphaFold solved a problem that had stumped biologists for 50 years, predicting how proteins fold into three-dimensional shapes. That has implications for medicine that we're only beginning to understand. We're living through one of those moments in the history of computing where everything shifts. The last time it felt like this was probably the birth of the internet. Maybe bigger. So everything we've talked about so far, every computer from ENIAC to your phone, to the most powerful supercomputers on the planet, they all work the same basic way. They process information using bits. A bit is either a 0 or a 1, on or off, that's it. Every photo you've ever taken, every video you've ever watched, every message you've ever sent, it's all just enormous strings of zeros and ones being shuffled around really, really fast. Quantum computers are different. Instead of bits, they use something called qubits, and qubits can do something that regular bits can't. A regular bit is either 0 or 1. A qubit can be 0, 1, or both at the same time. This is called superposition, and it comes from quantum physics. Yeah, the same quantum physics that Einstein called spooky. It is spooky, but it's real. There's another quantum property called entanglement. When two qubits are entangled, changing the state of one instantly affects the other, no matter how far apart they are. This lets quantum computers process information in ways that classical computers simply cannot. Now I want to be clear about something, because there's a lot of hype around quantum computing. Quantum computers are not just faster versions of regular computers. They're fundamentally different, and they're not better at everything. For most things you do on a computer, browsing the web, writing documents, watching videos, a quantum computer would be useless, probably worse than your phone. But for certain specific types of problems, quantum computers could be exponentially faster than any classical computer ever built. What kinds of problems? Simulating molecules is a big one. If you want to understand how a drug interacts with a protein at the molecular level, you basically need to simulate quantum physics. And it turns out quantum computers are naturally good at simulating quantum physics because they literally run on quantum physics. This could transform drug discovery and materials science. Cryptography is another one. Most modern encryption, including the encryption that secures your bank account and your messages, is based on the fact that certain math problems are incredibly hard for classical computers to solve. Factoring very large numbers into primes, for example. A powerful enough quantum computer could potentially crack these codes. This is why governments and tech companies are already working on quantum-resistant encryption. They're preparing for a future where current encryption methods might not be safe anymore. Optimization problems are a third area. Finding the best route for delivery trucks, optimizing financial portfolios, training AI models more efficiently. These are problems where you're searching through an enormous number of possibilities for the best solution. Quantum computers could potentially explore many possibilities simultaneously. So where are we actually at with quantum computing right now? Honestly, we're early, very early. In 2019, Google announced quantum supremacy with their Sycamore processor. They said it solved a specific problem in 200 seconds that would take the world's fastest classical supercomputer about 10,000 years. IBM disputed that claim, saying a classical computer could actually do it in a couple of days with the right techniques. Either way, it was a milestone. But current quantum computers are fragile and temperamental. Qubits need to be cooled to near absolute zero, colder than outer space. Any tiny disturbance, heat, vibration, electromagnetic interference can cause errors. Current quantum computers have high error rates and limited numbers of qubits. We need millions of stable qubits for the really useful applications. Right now, the best machines have a few thousand, and most of those are needed just for error correction. We're kind of where classical computers were in the 1940s. The machines exist. They work. We can demonstrate that the principles are sound, but they're enormous, fragile, expensive, and not yet practical for most real-world problems. The people working on quantum computing today are the Turings and Flowers and Zeuses of this generation, building something that most people don't understand yet for a future that most people can't quite see yet. Or it might turn out that quantum computing is useful for things we haven't even imagined. That's usually how it works with genuinely new technology. The most important applications are the ones nobody predicted. So let's zoom out for a second. We've come from bones with notches carved into them to quantum processors that operate near absolute zero. From a Greek mechanism with 30 bronze gears to AI systems trained on the entirety of human knowledge. That journey took about 35,000 years, but most of it happened in the last 80, and the pace keeps accelerating. Right now, computers are everywhere, and I mean everywhere. Not just the obvious ones like your phone and laptop. Your car has dozens of processors in it. Your microwave has a computer. Your washing machine, your thermostat, your credit card, your traffic lights, the elevator you ride, the airplane you fly in. Hospitals run on computers. Power grids are managed by computers. Financial markets are driven by algorithms, making thousands of trades per second. The entire global supply chain depends on computing. If every computer on Earth stopped working right now, civilization wouldn't just slow down, it would collapse. Within hours, we've built a world that literally cannot function without computing. And most people never think about that. You flip a light switch and the power grid's computers manage the load. You buy groceries and a network of computers tracks inventory, processes your payment, and orders replacements. You drive somewhere and GPS satellites and mapping software guide you. Invisible computers everywhere running everything. But there are real challenges. Data centers that power the cloud consume enormous amounts of electricity. The energy required to train a single large AI model can equal the lifetime carbon footprint of several cars. As computing grows, so does its environmental impact. We need more efficient chips, better cooling systems, and cleaner energy sources to power all of this sustainably. Cybersecurity is another growing problem. As more of our lives move online, the stakes of hacking get higher. It's not just stolen passwords anymore. It's attacks on hospitals, power plants, water systems, elections. The same connectivity that makes modern life convenient also makes it vulnerable. And then there's the question of who benefits from all this technology. Not everyone has equal access. There are billions of people with limited or no internet access. The gap between those who have computing resources and those who don't is a real issue. Technology can reduce inequality or it can amplify it depending on how it's deployed and who controls it. Looking ahead, the next frontiers are genuinely wild. Neuromorphic computing is designing chips that work like biological brains, processing information in parallel the way neurons do instead of following the step-by-step approach of traditional processors. These chips could be dramatically more energy efficient for certain tasks, especially AI. Researchers are experimenting with DNA computing, using actual biological molecules to store and process information. DNA can store an unbelievable amount of data. In theory, all the data humanity has ever created could be stored in about a room full of DNA. We're nowhere near making that practical, but the early experiments are promising. Brain-computer interfaces are getting more sophisticated. Companies are working on devices that can read signals directly from your brain and translate them into computer commands. For people with paralysis, this could be life-changing. The ability to control a computer or a prosthetic limb with your thoughts. Further out, some people envision direct brain-to-computer communication that could augment human thinking. Whether that's exciting or terrifying probably depends on who you ask. And of course, there's the big question. Artificial General Intelligence, AGI. When or if we build an AI system that can match human-level intelligence across all domains, not just pattern matching or language generation, but genuine understanding, reasoning, creativity, common sense. Some researchers think we're a few years away. Others think we're decades away. Others think we might never get there with current approaches. Nobody really knows, and anyone who tells you they know for certain is probably selling something. Every generation in the history of computing has thought they were close to the peak. The people building ENIAC thought they were building the ultimate machine. The people building mainframes thought personal computers were toys. The people building PCs couldn't imagine smartphones. We have no idea what computing will look like in 50 years. If history is any guide, it'll be something we can't currently imagine. And that's the thing about this whole story. It's not really about machines. I mean, it is. We talked about a lot of machines, but underneath all the gears and vacuum tubes and transistors and chips, the story of computing is really about people. People who needed to count things. People who dreamed of machines that could think. People who built impossible things in their parents' living rooms. rooms, people who broke codes that helped win wars and then were told to burn the blueprints, people who gave world-changing inventions away for free, people who were punished for who they were despite being geniuses who changed the world, from a carved bone in prehistoric Africa to an AI that can write poetry and diagnose diseases, from the Antikythera mechanism in a Greek shipwreck to quantum processors cooled to near absolute zero, from Ada Lovelace writing programs for a machine that didn't exist yet to billions of people carrying supercomputers in their pockets without thinking twice about it. The tools keep changing. Bones became beads, beads became gears, gears became vacuum tubes, vacuum tubes became transistors, transistors became microchips, microchips became the invisible fabric of everything. But the drive behind it all is the same thing it's always been: the very human need to compute, to count, to calculate, to understand, to solve problems, to push just a little further than what seemed possible. This story isn't over. Not even close. The next chapter is being written right now by researchers in labs and engineers in offices, and kids tinkering in their bedrooms who don't know yet that they're about to change everything, just like Babbage and Turing and Wozniak didn't know. You never know at the time. That's the entire history of computers. It's been a long, weird, brilliant ride, and the best part is probably still coming.